Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg. Today I'm going to wax nostalgic and talk about the first pen that, fountain pen that I ever used back in the 70s in high school. I mean, this isn't the actual pen, but it is similar to the pen that I use. I don't own that pen anymore, unfortunately, but this is the same model. Now, I'd love it if somebody who watches my channel would let me know why it is that in the 1970s in high school, at least if you were a high school student in New York, I went to the school Fieldston. Suddenly, teenagers who were, I think we were probably sophomores or juniors, suddenly were all using fountain pens. In particular, this model of fountain pen. It's a cartridge pen. It's often referred to as Sheaffer's student pen. And that's interesting because I've only found one advertisement at one point in which it is branded as Sheaffer's student pen. There's no doubt that it was marketed for students, but for, I think, obvious reasons, they wouldn't have used that as its name because I don't think they wanted to limit its sale to students. And, up until they sold this pen from in different versions from the 1950s to the 1990s, and you could get it at places in the 90s like Staples and in stationery stores. And it was sold to grown-ups, all types of people. In fact, Maurice Sendak used one of these in the 70s and 80s, sometimes to sign books or to write letters with, not so much to do his final artwork. I did used it when I was first becoming an art student and used to draw in my sketchbook with this pen. I remember in high school, people were really into the different colors. And this is a cartridge filler pen. It doesn't actually even fit a converter, or you could, and I don't think anybody back then did, but nowadays people buy these vintage pens and they, by putting silicone around the screw top, the section, you can use it as an eyedropper because the whole pen itself is, of course, plastic. So it works very well as an eyedropper with silicone. Here you can see it with the cartridge. And I remember peacock blue was very popular. They don't make peacock blue anymore. They still manufacture the Sheaffer cartridge. Here's how the pen looked in the 70s. And you can see it doesn't say anything about student pen on it. This is the same pen that I just showed you. And it says here it's $1, believe it or not. And in this particular package, you get free 5 cartridges, all for $1. Now, my guess is that one of the reasons this pen was so inexpensive is that it's a perfect example of selling the pen and then making money on the cartridges. But the cartridges back then were only 49 cents for a 5-pack, or 98 cents for a 12-pack, which it says on the back of this. And the cartridges are very cheap. You can take one of those cartridges if you want to use regular ink and reuse it, clean it out, reuse it with uh, um, needle, and fill it that way. I can actually show you how I do that. And that's a way. So if you want to use different colors, and they still sell these cartridges, but they're not cheap anymore. They're, you see them for $6, $7 in the store, and I don't know for how much longer Sheaffer is going to be using these cartridges. Now, as I say, the pen begins in the 1950s. From what I can tell, and it's actually surprisingly little history about this pen. Let me also say another interesting thing about it in terms of collecting is they made so many of these and they are so reliable. They write so well. I've never actually found a used one of these pens that didn't write well. That they're very inexpensive to get and collect. So it's kind of fun to collect them. You can get them as cheap as $5. They run the range. If you want to get them in a packet like these guys that are mint, I've got for around $20. So, you know, that's really cool. So in terms of naming, yes, so there is one example where they are referred to as a student pen in a packaging. But in the 80s, they were referred to as the People's Pen. Sheaffer actually had a whole line of People's Pens. They're ballpoint pens that also were sold under that. And I think they were trying to sort of pick up on a kind of almost hippie kind of look. This is early 80s. And here you can see it's $1.29 at this point. I think this might be early 90s or maybe still the 80s. It just says Sheaffer and it's $1.49. And here is the latest version from the 90s, I guess. And I think they may even sell this in other places after the 90s. And you can see that they're still selling it with the 2 cartridges. You can also see that there are demonstrator versions and there are colored versions of the pen. Now, in the 1950s is around when Sheaffer introduces cartridges, the cartridge pen. And I'm not sure if Sheaffer is the first to do this, but it's certainly among the first to introduce a pen that takes a cartridge rather than having to go to all the problems of filling the pen. And that's a big change in terms of fountain pens, and obviously is trying to respond to the ease and the simplicity of a ballpoint pen, right? So you can start using cartridges. And this is one of the earliest of, if not the earliest, Sheaffer cartridge pen. And you can see that it looks very similar to the later, what I'm still going to call the student pen, in terms of this is where the cartridge would go, and this little metal pointy element which punctures the cartridge. But it has a hooded nib, right? And then here is a pen with which still has a touchdown system, but it has a nib that's very similar to the Sheaffer school pen, and it looks very similar to the Sheaffer school pen, but it has a touchdown filling system. Okay, so they kind of combine both these, and the earliest version of the student pen looks like this. It has this sort of cigar-shaped body, and this pen you mostly see as demonstrators. Here you can see it in red and green, and this is clear, and here you can see it with the cartridge in it, with the demonstrator versions. And then rarer are opaque versions, like this one, kind of green. Just got these. And where you can sometimes, these might be $10, even $5. These now in the market now are closer to 20 or more, because you don't see them so much. It's interesting that when these pens were introduced, they could be as much as almost $3, which was a lot of money then, back in the day, in the late 50s and 60s for a pen. But later, the later versions became much cheaper. In the 70s, you can see them for $1, $1.29. One of the things to look when you're buying these vintage pens is the metal ring easily comes off, and you really need that ring in order for the pen top to fit securely. Without the ring, it doesn't fit securely, right? Now, the earlier versions then have this sort of cigar shape or torpedo shape, and the cap also has a torpedo shape. These pens post very well because they're pretty small, but when they post, they're full size and they're very light, and they only came in fine and medium, no broad. Later, there's the Sheaffer introduces the no nonsense pen, which is very similar in terms of the cartridge, and those, I think they're still making a version of those, use calligraphy nibs. So that's as close as you can get now today. And there are other kinds of pens that use cartridges that Sheaffer makes that I suppose are kind of, child of these pens. Okay, so the first versions Version 1 is this, what we could say, torpedo shape or cigar shape, usually demonstrators. Um, and then it shifts to the style in the 70s, which is no longer has the sort of torpedo shape at the bottom. It has this sort of pointy shape on the bottom and the top, and otherwise is quite similar. This comes in demonstrator versions in blue and green. Those are the ones that I think are particularly attractive. And then they also come in colors. So, oh God, I'm showing you the wrong ones. So here are orange and black, and they come in yellow and olive green. I'm personally not a big fan of the color ones that are opaque, because you can't see the ink window. But nevertheless, they come in a whole range of colors. And I'm not, I still keep seeing new colors. Like an orange one was pretty new for me, and I know they come in red. So I don't know. I've never seen a complete list of all the different colors that they come in. Then in the 90s, so you're talking about now version 3, they then have a flat top. So in the 90s, they introduce a flat top and a flat bottom. So it becomes super modern, I suppose. They're simple, super simple. And this makes a lot of sense to me. I sort of like the point on the top and the bottom, but I can understand from a design standpoint that it's unnecessary and probably less expensive to do this. They have very strong clips. They have very strong clips. And I think they are made to really last, even though they were very inexpensive. Here's another red flat top, flat bottom. And again, very simple, very straightforward. They write very, very well, I think. Not super smooth, but not with a tremendous amount of feedback. I don't think it's that different, actually, the way they write from, let's say, a Pilot Metropolitan. I think that would be a similar type contemporary pen to the way that these write. And as I said, they're very, very reliable. The biggest downside of the pen, I would say, is that they don't use converters, and you have to really, clean out the cartridges and use that. I've seen online rumors that you can find a converter that will fit. The problem with the reason converters don't fit, well, first of all, the section has this very long and pointed metal feed, which punctures the cartridge. So a converter would have to sort of hug that part, so that's a problem. And then the other problem is that the actual barrel is pretty narrow. So a converter would, and short, so a converter would have to fit into that barrel, and most standard converters won't fit into the barrel. So, and right now, since they don't make this pen, I'm not sure that there's a huge demand for somebody to design a converter that would work. And I guess because the cartridges were so inexpensive back in the day, there wasn't a demand for converters back then. So, really, converters only really become popular anyway in, I think, fairly recently. Keep in mind, this is something that, I think is hard for people today who use fountain pens to sort of get their head around, but it was only relatively recently that people really were obsessed with using all kinds of different color inks in their fountain pens. For the most part, people had a favorite color and they stuck to it, and that was just made it easier because you didn't have to spend a lot of time cleaning your pen. You just kept putting new cartridges in it. Rather than having to wash it out over and over again. All you would have to do is wet the nib to clean it. You wouldn't have to take the ink out. And so that, in a way, is something to keep in mind with how people use these fountain pens. And now I think, the hobby of fountain pens, and people who are obsessed with fountain pens, they like switching out the inks all the time. But that wasn't so true, I think, back, even a few decades ago, when people are using fountain pens. So as always, I will do a writing sample and I will do a drawing I'd love to hear people's experiences with these pens. Sheaffer also has the no nonsense pen, which I think I know people also, for some people that was their first fountain pen, and it's a bit bigger and but very similar concept of pen. And as I say, they use that model really for their calligraphy line of pens, and I'd be curious to know what people feel about it. I really love these pens, and then I think also the fact that they're so affordable. It's fun to collect them, and has an entryway into this whole fountain pen obsession. Well, how did they write? Well, as I say, they write really nicely. This is, I guess, the version 2 of the pen, and it's medium, and I'm using turquoise ink in it, and it's a cork cartridge. The turquoise actually I think is a lot like the peacock blue color that we used to like so much. That was the sort of favorite color that people had back in the day in the 70s, as I remember. And this one particularly is smooth. I think sometimes what happens is you get a pen that has been used so much that it kind of, over the years, has gotten smoother. Some of them are scratchier. The fine is not super fine. It's more like like a Western fine, and this is something like a medium to a broad almost. There's absolutely no line variation to it. And this pen, particular one, writes very wet. Given the simplicity of the cartridge system, I'm always amazed at how easily the ink flows. You never have problems with getting ink to the pen. I used to use this to draw in my sketchbooks for years and years, and I just never had any problems with them. And given the fact that they were so cheap, it's really fantastic. You didn't mind it if you lost one. So once again, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this talk. Now I'm going to do one of my drawings. For this drawing, I'm using a yellow version 3 of the pens. That's the one with the flat top and the flat bottom, and brown cartridge ink. It's a medium, and again, it's very smooth, very perfect flow. I'm drawing some beautiful yellow roses that actually I got around the time of my birthday, and then coloring them in with Dr. Martin's watercolor.